I'm Matt Corser from the Strengthening and Sustaining Ohio Suicide Prevention Coalition's initiative. Welcome to Segment 7, a deeper dive into what you need to know as you conduct CRA interviews. This segment will focus on 4 things. We'll provide knowledge and a roadmap for preparing to conduct a community readiness interview. We'll review interviewing basics and considerations. We'll talk about the importance of practicing. And we will review some common questions that may come up during the interview process. As always, all of the materials are on the webpage, including this video, the PowerPoint slide deck, the CRA interview introduction, and the CRA interview script. Let's start with a brief recap of basic steps for conducting a CRA. First, we selected and defined the community for the CRA. Next, we identified a problem of practice. And our shared problem of practice is readiness to engage in a comprehensive approach to suicide prevention using the CDC strategies. Next, we've been engaged in planning to conduct our CRAs, including forming a CRA team, obtaining supplies, preparing the interview and introductory scripts, and identifying key informants from various community sectors. The next step then is to conduct interviews and record them, to transcribe those interviews, to score and analyze the data, to report the data, to share the data and results out with your coalition and community, and then to develop a plan to increase readiness. Prior to beginning a CRA interview, make sure that you have your technology ready. Log into Zoom and make sure that the meeting invitation shows the correct day and time, and that you have set the meeting to record. If you're using phone or face-to-face technologies, check your recording device's battery level and audio quality and prepare to record the interview. And that may include putting an audio pickup earbud in position, getting ready to start that new recording, things like that. And make sure you know the name of the individual you will be interviewing and the sector or area of the community she or he is representing. There are key interviewing considerations. The first is interview qualifications, interviewer readiness, standardizing the interview, training the respondent, and providing non-directive feedback and probing. Interviewer qualifications. The interviewers you select need to be completely honest in their work, reliable and conscientious, especially about keeping meeting times and days that are set with key informants. They need to be objective in their manner of asking the questions on the interview guide. Faithful and neutral in recording answers. They need to be interested in people. They need to be able to inspire people's confidence and put them at ease. And they need to be sensitive to any needs or concerns that participants may have during the interview process. Let's talk about interviewer readiness. It is critically important to practice prior to conducting the first CRA interview. You can do that with a coworker or colleague. You can also do self-practice where you voice the interview questions. The idea here is to make sure that you can read the interview guide, that you're comfortable with the wording of the questions, and that you have some experience with how the questions flow and how the interview guide flows. You want to make sure that you plan for the interview. Test your technology and/or recording. If necessary, plan appropriately for any travel you need to do to conduct the interview. And make sure that you have support materials ready. And that's going to include a copy of the interview guide, and you may want to print that in a larger font so it's easier to read. A notepad for any notes you want to jot down, and a pen. We can't emphasize enough the importance of personal readiness. To the extent you can, please be in the moment and make sure that your single focus is your interaction with the respondent. And that includes minimizing disruption from electronic devices. To turn your phone to silent or to turn it off. To turn email off. Do everything you can to make sure that you're able to focus on that respondent during the CRA interview. Next, it's important to standardize your community readiness interviews. This is going to involve reading the question exactly as it's worded. And if the respondent's answer to the question is not a complete answer, you can probe for clarification in a non-directive way. What that just means is to probe without influencing their answers. And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. You want to make sure that the respondents are able to answer without interviewer involvement. Basically, you want to make sure that what's recorded is only what the respondent says. You want to communicate a neutral or non-judgmental stance with respect to the answers. And you want to work to avoid simple yes or no answers by key informants. When you get to the scoring process, it's very hard to score a simple yes or no answer. You'll also need to focus on training your respondent. Being interviewed is a new experience for many community members. Oftentimes we find that they feel like this is an honor, that someone is actually asking them for their perspective. They really do want to do a good job during the interview process. It's really important that you read the interview introduction prior to beginning the interview process. It's going to set the community members' expectations. It's going to tell them what you need them to do. And it's going to help them understand that there really are no right or wrong answers. This is the interview introduction. And you also have this as a resource on the web page. We talked a few minutes ago about the importance of non-directive probing and feedback. What that means is that when you're giving feedback or you're probing answers, you want to make sure that the interactions you're having are not changing the respondent's answers. So here are some good comments that you can use on performance or on answers. Things like, this is helpful information. It's important to find out what people think about this. Or thanks, it's important to get your opinion. Uh-huh is always a good sort of feedback. You can say thank you. You can say I see. And if you need your respondent to elaborate, you can always say, could you talk a little bit more about that? On the right side, you'll see some things that we don't recommend. And these are actually types of feedback that have come out of past CRA interviews. What a good idea. That's really interesting. I totally agree with you on that. Good and fine. Awesome. Wow, it sounds like amazing things are happening in your community. Or, I have never heard of a community being able to do this before. That type of feedback is going to change how your respondents answer subsequent questions in the interview process. Because what you're doing there is you're giving them positive validation. And psychologically, they're going to seek more of that. They want to make sure that you're pleased. So focus on the types of feedback in the left-hand column, which will respond to your respondent, but will not actually change their answers. Here are some tips as you're going through the community readiness interview process. You can validate the response, read it back to them. You may have respondents answer off topic or on the wrong topic. And in that case, it's very simple to say, okay, thank you for that, and then reread the question. You can probe answers that aren't clear and ask your respondents to elaborate. And it's fairly likely that you will have at least one situation where your respondent does not know the answer. And not knowing the answer is perfectly fine. It actually gives you a lot of understanding about community readiness. As with probing, if you need more information, you can ask your respondents to elaborate on their answers. Now, you may have respondents get emotional, angry, or frustrated during the interview process. And that's normal. It's not a problem. What's important is just to keep that interview moving. It can be something where you let them vent, but then also at an appropriate time, make sure that you do move that interview process forward. Working through all of these scenarios really highlights the importance of practice. When you set up your practice sessions with other coalition members, family members, or other colleagues, you can have them play various roles. Someone who's very easy to interview. Someone who's doing the interview but really doesn't want to be there. Someone who doesn't want to talk. Someone who talks too much. And someone who's really, really angry about something going on in the community. All those scenarios will help you be ready for the CRA interview process. Frequently asked questions. First, why are some questions in the interview guide bolded? Second, can I edit the interview guide? And third, can I practice my interviewing skills? Answering that first question, why are some of the questions in the guide bolded? Those are questions that you absolutely need to ask for the scoring process. Questions that aren't bolded are good to ask, but not essential to scoring. You can use those non-bolded questions as follow-ups. You can use them if your respondent is not talking a lot and you need to draw them out more. Question 2, can I edit the interview guide? We've gone ahead and created the interview guide to support this CRA process for our problem of practice. You may fill in your coalition name, but you really should not edit the interview guide beyond that. In the past, when we've had coalitions edit the interview guide, they find at scoring, it becomes very hard to score and to understand community readiness. And the third question is, how can I practice my interviewing skills? The answer to that question really is to role play. To make sure that you are getting enough practice with different types of scenarios so that you can go into the CRA interview process confident and in a good space to handle whatever might come with you. It might be good to conduct 2 or 3 practice interviews so that you really get the hang of how the guide works and what to expect when you're interacting with the respondent. This training segment has focused on really giving you the tools that you need to conduct a community readiness interview. We focused on the importance of practicing reviewed common questions. Segment 8 is going to focus on transcribing your interviews. Just to recap, these resources are on the webpage: the video, the PowerPoint slide deck, the interview introduction, and the interview script.